Okay, so hello to everyone for this last roundtable discussion and closing remarks of our Symposium 2020, a year without public space, reflections and outlooks. I think that probably most of the people now online have followed some of our sessions before, but just to mention, this initiative was started in early April, originally by Luisa Bravo, who's also joined us now from Europe, from Bologna, and myself, and with a lot of partners and guests from UN Habitat and also from TU Delft and many other institutions that joined this initiative. And we had basically 20 webinars over since May to September, and the symposium is now concluding this event. And I think it's nice to see that some of you still have the energy to join the last session, because today and yesterday was already a marathon of symposia, and I know there's so many other things also to do, and also many other events happening, and actually in Hong Kong is beautiful weather, so maybe some people might be also outside. Now, for this session, we wanted to look back at this whole period, and from there define some outlooks into the future, how we can deal with the pandemic or address the new normal in regards to public space. We are very fortunate that we could find three speakers for this session. First we will have Jim Walker, founder of Walk 21, then Maurice Hartefeld from TU Delft, who also joined our earlier sessions, and then we will have Jose Chong. It's a great pleasure to have you again from the Global Public Space Program from UN Habitat. And afterwards we will have a roundtable discussion, as we usually have this, and then also Luisa will contribute to our discussion. Just for those that newly joined us, as in our other sessions, you can anytime send us questions with the Q&A function on Zoom. So let me come to our first speaker, which is Jim Walker from Walk 21 Foundation. We thought to invite Jim because for many reasons. One is, of course, that with the pandemic, there was a lot of discussion of increasing walkability, make it easier in neighborhoods to get to services, and also be able to social distance and have a space to relax in neighborhoods, and walkability became really a key topic. Now, this is of course not a new topic, but still an important topic, because still so much can be done. And in fact, Jim Walker over the last 20 years, basically, is promoting this idea of better walkability with his foundation, and has then worked in many different cities with different events and conferences to promote this idea. And he's working or advising also WHO on a global physical activity action plan, and supporting United Nations Environment, also in regards to COVID response in Africa. So we thought that somebody who is very much at the forefront in kind of promoting those issues, so not only knowing about it, but also to try to implement those ideas, this could be a great way of looking forward. And that's why we invited Jim now for the final session of our event. And I would say, without further ado, I give the word to you to share your.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Hendrik. And thank you very much for inviting us. It's a real pleasure to be part of this. I think it's, as you say, it's not as though we've only just started walking, but I must say it's been an extraordinary time for us, that we have never been so busy, while people have demanded more than ever safe spaces and realized that need for space. Space always feels like we're talking about a gap in people's lives, but actually without that gap being filled, with the opportunity to go out, to meet each other, to breathe, to walk, to move, I think people have realized what they're missing. And so I just want to just take you through a couple of points here that we've identified over the last few months that I think hopefully we can think about in a more positive way, how we might learn from some of these issues that we've been facing globally. One of the, let me just make sure I'm on the right. Is that working? Yes, you can see this. You'll have seen plenty of really rather wonderful designs where the amount of space, if we're thinking about public space, not just in terms of the space between buildings, but actually the roads and the opportunity that COVID has provided to give an equity of reallocation of public space and reimagining. And in lots of places, people have been talking about 2 meters or at least 1.5 meters. And wouldn't it be lovely if that was possible everywhere? And in lots of places where there is maps and where there is data, it has been possible to identify where we have adequate or inadequate sidewalks, footpaths. You know, you might have seen some maps like this, which suggest where it's safe to walk and where it might be less tolerable, as they call it, or less even, or maybe even inadequate. But what we found in places all over the world is that actually is missing the fact that in most countries, there isn't a footpath. And most of the walking that happens globally, at least 85% of the walking that happens internationally, there is no footpath. And 92% of those roads don't have a crossing. And so this pandemic is happening at a time and in a public space which wasn't safe when we started. And so when you reflect on what happens and the impact of COVID is colored here in blue. Globally, yes, and this was data that I took from September. So obviously things get out of date quite quickly with the COVID numbers, but you know, COVID is having a massive impact. But if we think about it in terms of the relationship in lower middle income countries, actually pedestrian and cyclist crashes, people who are dying on the road because of a lack of safe public space, is still a massive burden, a daily burden on countries, and will continue to be even after COVID, hopefully, if we get there. And we did some work with UN Habitat and with UN Environment, looking specifically about how countries have responded in Africa to COVID. And I wanted to share with you this data because I think it's very helpful to recognize that, yes, in many countries, mobility went down. And I think when we're talking about here today, about how the streets almost emptied, actually that is what is shown in those blue lines in several countries for sure. But the red lines also illustrate that in some countries, there was an increase in walking. And what we have found in talking to countries is that actually, because of the pandemic, the need to go out to earn food, to get water, to earn money and to get food has never been stronger. And in fact, actually increased the need to move. And so I want to just make sure we don't always think about the fact that nobody went out, nobody did anything. Yes, we worked in more locally in neighborhoods, you know, that was clear. But actually in lots of places, people had to go out still. And so that demand for that public space being right is really quite key. And what that causes me to reflect on over these 20 years, as you kindly point out, Hendrik, is that very often we think about the most livable places, which we use as a shorthand, is where sometimes we talk about where we've got people walking, choosing to walk, are very often these places like Vancouver, Calgary. People pick out Copenhagen, of course, always as one of the nicest places to walk, Barcelona, etc. And it makes me reflect on the fact that very often the places where most people are walking, most often 70 to 80% of people, and I think the highest numbers of people walking are actually in Hong Kong, if you look at the data, it isn't always the nicest experience. And we felt that this is an opportunity to redo this map, to think about how we might get this equity in there so that everybody who is walking, whether they have to or whether it's by choice, we could actually think about the quality of that public space and that experience with or without COVID. And you'll have heard over time about this, and particularly in the last few months, about this 15-minute neighborhood. And I think there's something really valid about this that is being promoted by Anne Hidalgo in the Mayor of Paris, but is being copied now by lots of people in recognizing that what is within reach of 15 minutes of your home, the work, your healthcare, places of worship, your park, your shop, the school, public transport, if that isn't walkable, if it isn't safe, if it isn't accessible, if it isn't attractive, that's what we mean by walkable. If we haven't got those essential basics, then actually it doesn't work. And so there are places, as we'll have seen, like in Dublin, the Irish government, they already had data, they already had a plan. And what we saw during COVID was they planned for an increase of 100% more walking, 300% increase in cycling in order to make the city continue to work. And even in Africa, this is a picture from Uganda, where we found that they reallocated the space. They actually stopped people driving, and they gave the roads back, big roads, back to people to walk, to get on their every journeys. And they all went, and they all used that space. I think it's really quite exciting to see some of the changes that we've done. But my main point here, and I know I don't have long, so this is really what I wanted to say, is that what we've seen all over the world is that those people who had data, who had capacity, i.e. people who knew what they were doing in place and already had a policy about encouraging walking, then they were the ones who are more likely to act. So all those countries in Africa, including many in Latin America, places like Bogota and cities like London, cities like Paris, and the ones that you'll have seen like Milan, etc., etc., they all had data, they all had capacity, they all had a plan. But universally, in all the countries, even where they didn't do anything, they've seen a massive shift. In fact, 90% increase in Africa of people who said that they are now more aware about what walkers and cyclists need. And a 94% increase in Africa of saying we are willing to do more about it. So I think we're on the cusp here of something, and I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to share it with you, that I think COVID has been an accelerator for change, to actually do something more positive that makes sure that we have safer, more sustainable and healthier communities, because we recognize that actually that's what matters most to us. So thank you for inviting us onto this. I think this is an opportunity, but if you don't have data, you don't have capacity, and you don't have policy, you're most likely not to do anything. So I think that is the opportunity, and I hope that this event, we can start having that discussion about how we might go forwards. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jim. So this, I think, is a great input also for our discussion later, and exactly this idea how we can look forward, right, now being so long in this crisis, right? Now I want to welcome the next speaker. That is Maurice Hartefeld. Maurice was also right from the beginning part of this endeavor and supported this initiative. Maurice is an assistant professor at TU Delft. Is teaching there in the urban design program, and also in Amsterdam, I believe, or otherwise until recently, and is doing research on various public space topics, indoor and outdoor, and comes now back to us to share his thoughts at this final event of our initiative, right? By the way, yesterday and the day before, he also organized a very interesting sequence of webinars on the relationship between online digital developments and public space, which is also, I think, or coming online probably later, posted the sessions also very related and interesting with people from MIT and so on. Okay, Maurice.
Yes, well, thanks for inviting me back. First of all, I want to emphasize that 2020, a year without public space, has been an impressive initiative. We have seen 20 webinars, engaging more than 100 speakers all over the world, and over another 1,000 attendees watching the presentations and thematic discussions live. And on YouTube channel, we see the numbers still growing. And so from May to September, the global community of public space experts have joined together, and the networks of public space have become a world wide web. And this all was non-exclusive. So at the moment, we are online, but our concerns are at the human space in its physical reality. We keep sharing our observations in an immense challenge, and it isn't easy. At the current pandemic crisis, the global death rate is approaching 1.5 million people. 50 million cases of positive testing. An extreme small minority of countries have not reporting any coronavirus cases. Kiribati, Nauru, Palau, Samoa, Tonga, Tuvalu, Vanuatu. They seem still on the safe side, but in contrast, particularly communities in urbanized areas are infected at large. LA, Miami, and New York, Rio, and Sao Paulo. Here, densities are high and people live close together, and thus transmission may go too fast, too easy. So my contribution to this roundtable discussion is not another presentation, deliberately, because we know the numbers, we know the effects, we know the responses, and we know the critics. Widespread lockdowns, curfews, and other measurements during a state of emergency have issued in many places around the world. The immediate responses have had a strong focus on the introduction of measurements for urban hygiene. Local governments provide sanitation infrastructures in public space, and signs and symbols to remind people to stay on distance. First wave, second wave, third wave. We still see a growing number of people hospitalized per day in our cities. We still face the same urban challenge. We are still mitigating health risk. Our concerns lies with those people being alone, young, fragile, or disabled, and whom are facing difficulties in participating in public life, online and on distance today. And with minority groups of all kinds, which are not recognized with the same rights in public space. Our concerns lies with privacy issues, control, and big data. These concerns remain. Yet, in my perspective, this closing event should not lock us in, metaphorically. It should provide an opening to expand our horizons again. Under changing conditions, we should question if everybody can have access to urban commons, to resources of the city, and public amenities. This is the nature of public space. Public space presumes granting the equal rights of all members of the human family, right? Public space gives place to universal human rights, like the right to freedom of movement and the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and association. As simple as it is. Although herd immunity seems not near, the landscape of COVID-19 candidate vaccines as drafted by the WHO provides hope. And as UN Habitat pronounces, cities can turn the COVID-19 crisis into an opportunity to build back better. COVID-19 calls for reimagination of public space both during and after the pandemics. This is the point where I would like to step in. Although extreme effects of the pandemics are being exposed in public space at the current, in fact, from many perspectives, they are synchronically also the result of decades of social change and technical innovation. They don't come from thin air. For example, that people move less and or to different places. In Europe, in March 2020, mobility dropped indeed, unexpectedly in Italy and Spain. And though extremes, most other European countries followed close. Near all people stayed home and or close to home. And again, since October 2020, we're seeing similar mobility decreases with respect to some intermediate bounce backs. Decreases of movement in Belgium, Czech, and the Netherlands are high again. Yet in difference in the recent periods, we see that the visits to the local parks are increasing generally. People stayed mostly home and closely to home, yet increasingly started to visit green public space nearby. Since years, people work more and more from home if possible. They shop and order online more. They are increasingly proactive online and in their own neighborhoods and streets. Public space is again seen as valuable in the immediate living environment. Public space provides people to relax. They eat and drink here. They exercise and play here. They read and text and chat. And some of them take selfies here. Communities appropriate these spaces progressively, and where possible, they bend it to their will. They adapt and rebuild communities if needed. In the current period, long distance travel radically dropped, and then I mean foremost with the car. And urban citizens have started to discover living at home and nearby. The house is slowly becoming more than just a place of domestic life. Many self-employed workers have been working from home for already quite some time, longer than the pandemics. Homework of all kinds make spaces of individual intimacy spaces for collective utility and labor. Homes of childminders, tutors, mechanics, technicians, artists, and general practitioners are de facto workplaces as well. To a lesser degree, this is, for example, true for a growing group of entrepreneurial people who offer services and goods online next to their permanent jobs. The offering of services and quality of life within the space in the vicinity of our houses has become important. Not every house, though, is equipped nor large enough. Thus, the commons nearby matter. Can we provide safe and inclusive public spaces which are open and accessible for all, yet also give a place to all? Can we design domestic public spaces? We may have to challenge generic infrastructures dominating the global city, which have introduced a lack of local public spaces. We may have to challenge car-dominated infrastructures when they block the outdoor living rooms. We may have to acknowledge that we also could live local and move slow. We may start to rethink dense neighborhoods with small dwellings and narrow, little and few public spaces. We may have to redesign high-rise areas without sufficient interior public spaces. We may have to consider areas where newcomers and/or reactive people form respectively high dynamic or reluctant public spaces. Because in these cases, and like many others, the challenge is to create public space for domestic and local life. So, to conclude, don't look too long to slides. If you watch live, you should look outside. Look through your window for a moment. Not every city is the same. And as our people diverse too, public spaces are very diverse by nature. You know best what to see. And in the spirit of the Sustainable Development Goals, leave no one and no place behind.
Thank you very much, Maurice, for your presentation. And I think we can come to some of those points back in the roundtable discussion. I want now to give the word to Luisa to introduce our next and last speaker, Jose. You are muted, Luisa.
Yes, I'm here, sorry. Thank you, Hendrik, and thank you to the two speakers that actually introduced the comprehensive idea of what public space can be in regard of future actions and future policies that we can put in place in order to change the mindset and change the city model for more safe, sustainable and resilient environments. I think we should talk a lot about how to become resilient, because this is what this pandemic is highlighting. And some communities, some cities already prepared the journey to resilience, but some others are still behind. And so I think this pandemic, as Jim also was mentioning, and as we said also many times during our initiative, this pandemic is giving the opportunities to reflect, is accelerating some processes that many experts around the world were already discussing, struggling sometimes with local governments to implement clear actions on the ground to change conditions in terms of accessibility and full enjoyment of public space. So now I'm glad to give the word to Jose Chong from the Global Public Space Program at UN Habitat. As you know, the Journal of Public Space is working together with UN Habitat to develop the Journal of Public Space contents, research, engagement, and topics covering different geographical areas and giving voice especially to unheard communities and the global south. So we want to discuss a lot regarding what we can do actually to leave no one behind, because the knowledge regarding public space, I'm talking about academic knowledge, is somehow established. We have a lot of acclaimed and really well-known scholars on public space, but what it is missing in the current discourse is what public space is, can be, or will be in those contexts where communities are vulnerable and where there is a very poor design of public space, as also Jim was mentioning. There is not even a very mature idea of what the public space is or can be, because there is no sidewalk, so it's impossible to walk, for example, and streets are just conceived as places for cars. Instead of thinking about streets as public spaces, a publication in 2014 from UN Habitat was actually addressing this. How do we think cities if we start rethinking the model of the city by starting from the streets as public spaces? So everything is around how people live the urban environments. And I'm actually constantly repeating that the urban environments are primarily human environments. So we want to take care of that approach, and we want to continue, hopefully, after this very long initiative, as Maurice was mentioning, that engaged so many scholars, and after this very rich marathon of this two-day symposium, we would like to continue the conversation, trying to reach as many as we can, and trying to establish a real network of knowledge and discussion around public space. So I'm glad to have Jose. Sorry for this long introduction, but I think it is important now that we are ending this long journey across public space by also trying to finalize some of the contents that we already fully presented, and we have 20 webinars available on City Space Architecture YouTube channel. You will have recorded webinars of these symposiums, so a lot of knowledge. So I'm glad that we can also discuss with UN Habitat Global Public Space Program to understand how we can actually have an impact in order to leave no place and no one behind. Jose, I will share your presentation from my side.
Okay, maybe I can start with introductions. Thanks a lot, Luisa, for this introduction, and also to my previous speakers, Maurice and Jim. I think a lot has been said along these 20 webinars, and also for my previous speakers. I only wanted to join to Maurice, saying that I want to congratulate to the whole team, who is behind organizing these 20 webinars. I have been following all of them, and I have also the lucky to be part of the first session when we were sort of trying to brainstorm and thinking at this year without public space. No, so it was for me a good opportunity also to reflect and to see behind 4 months ago in the presentation that I did, and how the world has changed and the things that remains still valid until now in November until the final symposium. I wanted to introduce you a little bit what we are doing from the UN Habitat, the public space program, and a little bit reflects of what have changed from the last year. Lisa, I don't know if you can put it in full screen. It's not possible we continue like that. But you can,
I can see it as a full screen. Can you see it as full screen?
No, it's not.
Sorry?
It's not full screen.
If not, we continue that, but it's maybe also to pass to the second slide on statistics. Yes.
Or otherwise, Stephanie, does it work on your one? So otherwise you could also do it. Okay.
Oh, can you see it now better?
Well, we can still see it, not too bad, but it's not full screen. But yeah.
Yes, I know, but it seems that full screen is not working. Okay, so I will do like this. If you can see it clearly.
Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think it is fine enough. I wanted to start with some statistics, and also Jim also presented a lot of what is happening on the situation on the global trends. I only wanted to reinforce some things that are the same. We see that over 90% of the total cases of coronavirus are in urban areas. But in the world that we have these structural inequalities and challenges, it's very difficult to follow the recommendations from World Health Organization. Only to remind you that we have around 1 billion people living in informal settlements and slums. 1.08 billion people live in overcrowded and inadequate housing, and 2.4 billion people live in lack of adequate access to safe water and sanitation. So this is still the same. So these are structural challenges. And also in terms of accessibility of public space, where in our last statistic that we have, we only have that around 50% of the inhabitants of the world living in cities have access to a public space in 5 minutes walk. So actually, this is something that we have to address. Next one, please. Also, for us, it is important to see what we produce from United Nations system, and Habitat also we're contributing a lot on this policy brief. In July, we launched the COVID-19 in an urban world policy brief, trying to address and to highlight the importance of cities against the pandemic. For us, this is quite important because this is a global crisis and one of the biggest in the 75 years of history of the United Nations, but also that is a combination not only of a health crisis, also is a humanitarian and socio-economic crisis. And this is quite fundamental to understand. So, and we have seen that the cities are in the forefront to fight the effects of this pandemic. And basically the pandemic have shown us the deep inequalities that we have in cities, no? And I think my previous speakers has highlighted that also. And it's what we, in this report, what we are proposing from the United Nations systems is to respond to these inequalities and long-term development deficit. We also we wanted to strengthen the capacity of local governments and to pursue a green, resilient, and inclusive economic recovery. And this is fundamental in the next years. Next one, please. Also, what we will have what we have seen, for instance, is that this will be very difficult since it is estimated that the income of local governments will be reduced by 15 to 25% in 2021. So actually the economic recovery is we will take 7 years to go. Some statistics show us that is we will be back to the levels of 10 years ago in terms of economic development. So it's all the gains that we have produced in the last years will be lost and we will have to recover on that. We have seen also some challenges, for example, the increase of waste, medical waste, specifically in Hubei, that is a province of Wuhan in China, more than 600%. Also in Thailand, increase of weight of 62% in general, but also an increase of private cars over public transport in China. So despite that this they recovered the pandemic, now it's this kind of behavior that are changing on the use of public transport and the use of private cars. No, so it's we have a lot of positive actions that we are seeing that is more on the increase of the use of non-motorized transport, but also how we can change the behavior of people recovering from the pandemic. Next one, please. What we are doing from Habitat side is we were producing actually the state of the world cities. And at the beginning, it's we call it in the world state of the world cities after pandemics. but we have realized that this will be a world and cities living in pandemics. So we will continue on that. And this is something that is like we have divided like in certain topics that are fundamental. For example, the rethinking the role of the states. So the urban governance, that is fundamental, the coordination between all the levels of government, addressing increasing poverty and exacerbation of inequalities that was highlighted before, particularly in cities, to rethink urban morphology. And I think like my previous speakers also were talking about more compact development, density, and what are the principles that we are promoting like in terms of urban development in general, and also the failure of the current urban economic business model. So this is are the topics that we are focusing on. Cities will have a premium role like to address like these challenges. Next one, please. What we did also, like at the beginning of the pandemic, we launched like the UN Habitat COVID-19 response, and actually we were targeting like three main actions, and one of them changed actually after like these months, and it's the last one. So it's like we want to promote more active learning on policy measures and practices, and actually this seminar contribute a lot on that. It's like we have seen that there is a lot of knowledge, there is a lot of innovations, and how we can also liaise like with the different partners, producing innovation, doing good practices, liaising with the local governments, like to increase the awareness and like to share experience between the peers, because basically this pandemic is global. Next one, please. I wanted to only to highlight like some examples of what we are doing, and also like for the researchers that are joining us, like they can have access to this information. We have launched a digital platform regarding cities on their readiness and response. This is basically using big data. So we have a database of more than 1,000 cities in terms of readiness, like for example, the public health capacity, the societal strengths, economic ability, infrastructure, and collaborative will in general, and then on the response. So it's like the express response, the treatment response, economic response, and supply chain response. So this is some resources that you can have access, like all the background data is related to big data. Next one, please. Also, what we did is at the beginning of the pandemic, we are using an application that is an open source application that is called Kobotoolbox. This has been used in many responses, even like for Ebola response. In this case, it was like to map public facilities that can help like for the recovery and to the response to the pandemic. So it's like this is an example of Kibera. We partner with youths. We send them like with this application that is in a smartphone. Like you put your reference point and try like to map like the different facilities. For instance, we have used the same application like to map quality of public spaces in more than 30 cities around the world. This is with the public space program. Next one. Also, another example of the work that we are doing is like we have launched like with the Mexico government socio-economic guide like for the recovery from the pandemic, like focusing on what Luisa was saying in urban resilience. So it's like now it's like the local government has to be prepared like to link the global urban and sustainable development agendas with the response to COVID. No, like this is a guide. This is a training. We have launched like several trainings like with Latin America, also to expand into to other regions. Next one, please. Finally, like from the public space program, it's like what normally we have is we support certain initiatives and partners, like the implementation of public spaces that can be punctual, but also at a citywide level. So what we did is like to reallocate a little bit the funds that we have, mainly like in these months, like to support the communities where with a small funding, where they like to respond to the effects of the crisis. No, like for instance, like some examples, We supported food security and economic reactivations through public markets in Mexico. We developed like this with a partner, a kit to feed children's imaginations of the ones who were in the lockdown, but at least like to give them like some opportunities like to reimagine and to play in their own houses. Also to increase hygiene in local markets in Niger, and also in installing like a hand washing facilities in Dhaka. And we did that a lot in many cities around the world. And also like to improve accessibility to public spaces and informal settlements in India. Last week, also we end like this call for proposals 2020, where we were giving like some grants like for implementation of public space and citywide programs, mainly like a targeting on COVID-19 response. No, so it's like also like please like every year like we launch like this kind of initiative. Like, just follow us in the social media, so it's like you are aware of these possibilities of funding. Next one, please. So finally, it's like we try like to summarize all these efforts like with the guidelines on public space and COVID-19, and it's like how to reimagine the public space in terms of accessibility, design, management, connectivity, and special inequalities. Next one, please. So this information you can find it online, and I wanted to next one, please, Luisa. It's fine. I wanted to highlight here only like what have changed like from the previous presentation, and it's like now we have seen like the clear linkage between health and public spaces, and only wanted to highlight like this research like from the Gale Institute, and on the question that they had of how you use public space during the pandemic, is around 65% of the respondents said that yes. And actually, they were highlighting that they were very important, like for the mental, physical, and emotional health. No, so it's like the pandemic has shown us the importance of public space in general. Next one, please. And on this relation that we have, like between health and public spaces, we see that public spaces are important, like to protect from harm, to protect, to promote health, to provide services, and like what we are seeing like is important for the long-term public health in general. Next one, please. I will go very quick on this one, but it's like for instance, like to protect harm, it's like we have seen a lot of examples around the world about the importance of expand the amounts of local of land allocated to public space, including streets, as you were saying, Luisa, like to guarantee physical distances. Many cities around the world, this is a picture of Vilnius in Lithuania, but it's like, for example, the street trees in the States or in many parts of the world. Next one, please. To promote health, and we have seen a lot, for example, like of this kind of temporal bicycle lanes, and now it's like the idea of like to change like from temporal like to permanent, and actually this is an opportunity that the pandemic has shown us, like to have like a more integrated and connected system of public spaces, including the streets. Next one, please. And also what is important, because public space has been fundamental to respond to the crisis, like to in terms of like to put like a temporary facilities, for instance, like for health facilities to combat the pandemic, and even like to guarantee like economic activities happening around the world. Like this is expansion of the street, like using economic activities. This is a market in Indonesia. Next one, please. And finally, like what we need to think is a more equitable distribution of public space around the city. And this is quite fundamental. This is an example of the historical peninsula in Istanbul. But it's like we need like now to link what is like a short-term gains, but also like with a wider vision of increasing accessibility to public space also for everyone living in cities. Next one, please. Final reflections from my side, and actually this graphic I show it in the first webinar, and I think it's quite important. I mean, previous speakers also talk about it, like it's important to link COVID-19 response and recovery with the Sustainable Development Agenda, only to highlight like the goal 3, that is about ensuring healthy lives and promote well-being for all, and goal 11 that is related to cities, and specifically we have a target on public space, no? The target 11.7 to provide universal access to safe, inclusive, and accessible public space, no? So this is quite fundamental. So it's like, as you were saying, Luisa, we need to accelerate the process to achieve sustainable development agenda. And this is an opportunity. Next one. Final reflections, and also I think crisis is an opportunity to have this paradigm shift in the construction of the management of the city. We have seen that management is a key issue regarding public space in general. We have to continue documentation, learning, and exchange of this innovative practice. And this is an example with the webinar series. We need to put public spaces, urban development, and the health agenda together. And this is quite fundamental in the years to come. And also, it's we have to promote integrated response with partners and different experts. Final slide, next one, please. Thinking back on the first webinar, and also in the title of this webinar series, A Year Without Public Space, what have shown us the last month, public space plays an essential role for the response and socioeconomic recovery of a COVID-19 pandemic. And hopefully, the next year, the year 2021, is a year with more public spaces. Thanks a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks a lot, Jose. It was great to see your presentation. I still remember when we had your first presentation in the first week of May, when we were kicking off this initiative, right? And already at that time, of course, was an impressive presentation. But I can see that you were working very hard at UN Habitat to really produce a lot of new documents and projects over the last year up to now, no? So very encouraging. Now we have around half an hour for the joint discussion. I want to remember everyone in the audience, you can send us your questions, and I will put them forward to our speakers. Maybe I can start with the first question that was sent, and in fact also you as a panelist, you can read it in your Q&A. So there was a question coming on cycling is encouraged outside of mainland China, while it is declining in China, sometimes because the political restrictions, many bike lanes become motor vehicle lanes in cities, and so forth and so forth, right? So we ideally, of course, in an ideal world, things would move always in the right direction. But we know also in reality, not always happen. I remember this beautiful movie by Michelangelo Antonioni, Chongguo, in 1972, when he made this documentary of China, and of course everyone was going by bicycle, right? It was basically the way to move. But China is one example, but we see, of course, a trend also in many other places where car usership is kind of going up, right? So anyone who want to respond to this question? Or basically it's so one is here's a question if it's kind of related to the car industry, but I think maybe we can frame it also more generally, how to respond to those kind of tendencies. Jim Walker, I see you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I think it's interesting to see how mobility shifts, and certainly we've seen a reduction in use of public transport generally, because you know that people have tended to go to private cars if they can afford to, and I think that's a really key point, that we know generally this sort of whole thing about choice. What are the options that people have? And how are we supporting that choice to be as positive, as resilient, to pick up Louisa's point, as possible? And I think this is an opportunity. In lots of countries, people have reallocated road space. Often it was parking, whether it's in neighborhoods or in other areas. At the end of the day, to try and create the cities we want, I think you have to think about that 500 meters around the shop, around your residential area, you know, that 15 minutes moment that we keep talking about. And I think is really critical. And making sure that you have allocated space for walking and for cycling should be the essential bit. We often talk about road user hierarchies, public space hierarchies, I'm sure is something similar too, but you have to put people first. And that is happening in more and more places. But I really wanted to pick up the point that Jose said, that you know, there is an inequity because there's a huge amount of people living without enough space, without those fundamental provisions. And I think if this, more than any other time, if this is the crisis where we actually build that in and get those essential moments right, then this is what we should be investing in. And I hope every city in every country will take that advantage.
Anyone else want to, Jose, I see you, yeah.
Yeah, maybe because also I wanted to react since I put like that graphic of like the increase of private cars in China, and I wanted to reinforce on the idea of Jim about convenient public transport. So it's like basically that the people will move in well, affordability of the transport option that they have, and also on what is more convenient for them. Our experience, like working with Chinese cities, also is like this increase of share bikes. It was mainly like because of the last mile. So they trust a lot on metro systems, and actually this is also this kind of increase. And when you have an urban development that is not very compact, where you have to move around long distances, actually the bicycle has certain limits or certain radius that you can move around. So it's like I will link also like this convenience and affordable transport options, but also with compact development. No, so it's like something that we have to think about, and also to reinforce the idea of what are the activities that we can do at the neighborhood level. Only to end up, and I think I stressed that in the presentation, is like how these temporal bike lanes actually goes to more from temporal to permanent, but also the incentives that you have. For instance, in Paris, what they were doing is also provide a certain grants to the citizens to fix the bicycles. Or in Peru, what they were doing is to the Ministry of Transport, they were designing a cheap bicycle. So it's not only to have the infrastructure, but the incentive, the whole system works towards a non-motorized mobility. No, so I think this is also important to think about.
Mm-hmm. Maurice, did you want to? I see you are unmuted.
No, I'm not muted. Well, I think it's the logical consequence not only of those who can afford it, but if you can afford it, you want to buy a car. Presumably, though this is not true in every part of the globe, we see in other cities that it is part of wealth to have not a car and have the facilities in the near proximity of the house, and that is wealth. I would say also that it is the result of a urban economic restructuring and the business models towards distributing people and expertise and labor on a regional scale. So people have to move. They have to be mobile. And so again, I want to emphasize that in the iconic movie you referred to, the model was different. It was more focused on the local. And then lastly, I also want to emphasize that although this is true percentage-wise, still a lot of people cannot afford a car and don't move. And they might be the future.
Maybe I add just, Louisa. Maybe.
Yes, yes. I would like to add some comments. I was taking notes while Jose was presenting, and you were also sharing your reflections. Regarding this aspect on public space and mobility, actually, I think it is a crucial point, especially during this pandemic, that we understand how human flows in the urban space work. So we already had like long years and decades of discussions regarding how to actually adjust mobility in order to redefine public space. And as Maurice pointed out, for some reasons, some people still rely on their private car. So unless, many policies encouraging the use of public transportation or the use of bicycle. So the only way we can actually work on this urban transition from the current car-oriented model to a more people-centric model is based on the creation of convenience in shifting from one model to another. And this convenience is coming from innovation. And if we talk about innovation, we are talking also about the economy and how the economy is supporting innovation in many different countries. And I think that during this pandemic, we understood that we also need another and fully contemporary model of innovation based on creative economy. And we saw, especially during this pandemic, a lot of creative actions, very quick, very impactful, ready to be used. Also in regard of public space, with a lot of tactical urbanism interventions. So communities are ready to this transition. The problem is to include in this acceleration also decision makers and local governments, because anytime there is a discussion regarding innovation and investments, of course, the excuse is there is not enough budget to work on this innovation. So that's why we need to understand how to become creative and how to push local governments in order to become creative. And in our initiative, we had an entire session dedicated on innovative approaches and creative practices. So we are also learning how to work on these transitions, and in order to create convenient opportunities for people to understand that this transition is possible. And the last comment also is related to the 15-minute city, which is actually promoting hyper proximity, which is a concept that has been into the urban discussion for quite a long time now. I mean, it's not new. Many different theories in the last decades were addressing this kind of ability to be autonomous in terms of neighborhoods and specific urban areas. This is also part of the transition. I mean, we cannot think about only one part of the equation. The equation is really very complex, and there are many different ingredients that we have to put together. But now it's time for decision makers actually to take a stand and to do something, because this is also what the Agenda 2030 is telling us. We are starting this decade of action. So we have to translate theoretical principles that are embedded in the Sustainable Development Goals into practical and fruitful outcomes on the ground in order to change urban conditions.
Okay, maybe just adding 2 points to this, I try very short. First of all, because it was basically in comment here about this region, mainland China, and we are here in Hong Kong. I think it was quite interesting when we see the Newtown developments in the 1970s in Hong Kong was very kind of comprehensive and already planned entire biking systems, although more for leisure. And it is amazing to see in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, and I believe also Zhuhai, for example, in China, builds also up a cycling system and so on. How these parts were even here in Hong Kong part of the planning always at that time. But we went away from that, and even though there's a very active biking culture, particularly in those this year where so many people bike, but of course we need infrastructure around it, maybe showers when it's very hot, all those kind of other things, right? That you can use it really and go to work afterwards, because otherwise there's no way. Now the other thing that I want to mention also is looking back at one of the great contributions that we had in the webinars, and maybe later some of you can help me with the name of the presenter, because I don't remember now. But there was also a great contribution of one speaker who was saying, particularly looking at the bicycle, that when we look at bicycles, that even though we have these kind of amazing bikes today, but in the principle of the bicycle, there are almost no fundamental changes in a layout of this kind of mode of transportation. And we know that there are some limitations, for example, weather, right? Because with good weather now, today is a beautiful day here, I can bike to my school and so on, it's no problem. But with rain, or we have a family, many people, maybe in mainland China, of course, many have the family. How do they act with this? And I think it was amazing to see how people are really looking much more bolder, also how what we know as a bicycle could be also entirely transformed to address, for example, rain coverage, other ideas, right? Just kind of bring this up because that is on one of our webinars, and I think it was kind of beautiful contribution. Now, looking back, you can still send us more questions. There's one by Sujata, maybe particularly for Jose. She's asking, should United Nations or UN Habitat not have the 18th goal, consciousness and spirituality, as a fundamental part of the way we live together? I just give this back to you from Sujata.
Yes, no, thanks a lot for that question. I think it's quite a good one. What we have along the whole Sustainable Development Goals and this cross-cutting is to incorporate the voice of the ones that are sort of left behind. No, so it's like how to incorporate actually the voice of everyone, particularly the vulnerable communities. And I think that link a little bit with a claim to have this kind of broader vision. But also the human rights approach. And this is quite fundamental for us. It's it is explicit in many of the goals and actually on the things that we are doing. And we are thinking about the human rights approach, not only for the generation that are living now, it's also for the future generations. No, if you link this idea with spirituality, also is embedded in the principles from the United Nations and also for the Sustainable Development Goals. So I will bring it more to the broader picture and only to reemphasize that I think the crisis is an opportunity. And I think now we have seen how we are more interconnected. So it's it's not only that the rich are the ones who will, or the poor are the ones that suffer more. It's we are suffering everyone. Something that it was said in another seminar, it was quite interesting. No? It's we are in the same ocean, but it's we are in different boats. No, and this is something that we have to reemphasize. One are in a very large yacht, and the others are in a small fishing boat. No, so it's something that we have to realize, and also when we are targeting the responses, and this is something that I wanted to only to reflect about the idea of the idea of who are these essential workers now. Because when we are talking about like this kind of 15 minutes neighborhoods, we know that also there is like some workers that they cannot afford like to have all the services in these 15 minutes. And this is something that we have seen actually a lot in developing countries, where you have mainly in the peri-urban areas, people living in informal settlements and slums, that they have to move like to the center of the city, to the formal area of the cities. And this is something that we have to target also on the mobility options that we are providing to them. No? So it's like maybe like this have shift about our conceptions of urban development, our conceptions about society as a whole, and the importance and the more interconnectedness of the world in general of everyone. Thanks.
Yeah, another thing comes to mind. I believe that the other question about 5 minutes, 10 minutes walk city, I think we talked about of this hyper connectivity or 15-minute city already and so on. So maybe I throw and send us other questions, right? More questions. Another point that I found interesting looking at Jim Walker's and Jose Chong's presentation, that you also made an important point how public space and economy is also related, no? And I remember, in fact, we organized with Theo Delft 2 publications on urban design for an inclusive economy with Henko Bickering together from our conference that we had here, and also with Maurice, one for the Journal of Public Space on the entrepreneurial city. And we see this this kind of heartbreaking effect that we have at the moment on the local economy, small restaurants and bookstores and all this that actually makes, of course, our cities vibrant and livable, right? This is basically what, and character and culture, everything of that. And all this is very much questioned and really, in many cases, dying. I think both of you had proposals that were each time showing also how economy and public space are actually very closely interrelated, and it can be really also a good way to promote public space, but really in this much more wider, together with health. Health is another, of course, key point, and we talk about this a lot. But maybe you want to explore a little bit more on that point that I found was resonated a lot with me, and I think it's probably something quite important. Jim or Jose, do you want to? Yeah, Jim.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to pick up on that last question as well, because I think you know, when we talk about humanity, you know, I think what we have learned is you know, we have to remember that we are social animals. As Jose says, you know, so many of us are choosing to live in cities, not because we want to be isolated and lonely, it's because we like to feel connected and together. And I think that loneliness is actually probably going to be the biggest killer in the future, because we've become so disconnected because of the public space that we've mismanaged. And it is an opportunity to think about how we weave humanity and equity through these sustainable development goals to get that right. And one of the things that I've noticed, certainly anecdotally as much as anything, is how many people feel a solace and a connection to nature at times of crisis. And actually connecting back, and I know in Hong Kong, because I've been there several times, you know, the importance of getting back to the river or being able to go to the mountains, connecting to a park. You know, these have become the places where we go and hear birdsong, we watch water move, we see the clouds change. It's vital. And I know a lot of people who are stuck indoors and can't leave their houses are watching Discovery Channel. You know, that's the one place where everybody is thinking, or they're listening to or watching webcams of swans, you know, on the Missouri River or something, and they feel a connection in a way and a peace. And I think this is really interesting about how we might think about nature being added into our public space. And that feels crazy for me to then flip that and talk about the economy, because I can get very spiritual in thinking about that, you know, the connection to biodiversity and our need to connect to nature. And yet we've had this model about, you know, how we're all here for growth. And this capitalism system that we've been on this treadmill for so long seems to imagine that we have to keep the money going and we have to keep going and getting more and more and more of it. I'm not so sure about that, but what I do know is that there is an intrinsic link between footfall, dwell time, and spend. And yes, if you've got people who want to go out and you've created a space where people will go and walk, it's not just about creating a place to move. You actually want to create a place to stay. And so the best measure of walkability is actually where you see people stopping, not just moving. So don't start counting pedestrians, count the number of people sitting, because 50% of walking is actually spent sitting. And it's the people who are kissing or smiling or at least giving you eye contact in the street is much more likely as a measure of a successful place. So don't measure spend and don't measure movement, but measure dwell time. And I think that success is likely, and maybe that connection to nature, maybe that's what we're looking for.
Thank you for that. I just want to clarify that when I was mentioning the economy, addressing a creative approach also related to economy, and we all say that cities are for people. So in my idea of capitalism is fundamentally different from the one that actually is dominating all our cities and you know, way of implementing policies. In my idea,
social capital.
Yes, in my idea, we should invest in the human capital, because this is a completely different approach and completely different mindset. And as I said at the beginning, urban environments are primarily human environments. So when I say creative economy, I mean that we have to redefine all the different forces and all the different actions around this concept. So the investment in public space is an investment in the human capital. And this is the difficulties when you are talking with, in my case, when you are talking with private investors or policymakers, to make them understand what the human capital is and the value of this human capital that can really turn cities upside down and create a completely different landscape, and that is able also to incorporate all the beautiful concepts that you were just explaining in terms of people enjoying the public space.
Jose, was there something you wanted to add to this part?
Yes, no, basically I think this discussion is quite interesting about the social capital, and I think this is fundamental. We have seen the value of communities like to build social resilience, no, like from the people in the balconies, no, that it was an interesting example of how they can push at least like to keep like this emotional tight like with the neighborhood. And it's like for instance, in my case, no, like the importance of the neighbors or the people living in the building, that it was the only ones that you can interact and also to have like this network of support, no? And we have seen that sometimes the city can allow that, but sometimes it can also prevent that, no? And this is quite fundamental. Also, I wanted to only to highlight last year, actually, the last 2 years we were together with the World Bank in a research and a publication that was launched during the World Bank Forum, actually during this year at the beginning. And the title of the publication is called The Hidden Wealth of the Cities. And the hidden wealth of cities were public space, because there is a lot of value on a well-designed network and accessible and inclusive public space. And actually, I wanted to go back, and this goes like with the wealth that can generate like for the economic activities, but also on the issue that we were talking about social capital. And I think public space will have a big role on the socioeconomic recovery, because if first, like as Jim was saying, if we manage to get back to the people, to the cities, and to the spaces, the public spaces, also it can be a step like a tool for the economic recovery of that going back to sort of normal in a sense, no? So I think this is fundamental. Also, now we have seen the importance of to have accessibility to these open spaces, even like for some populations as informal street vendors, no? So it's like was their only income or daily income, like to receive certain livelihoods. So I think this is fundamental, but not only like from the formal sector, also for the formal sector that can support the formal sector, like to allow to continue their activities with the proper social or physical distancing, and also that to continue at least like to survive. No, I think like this year for many businesses it will be like to survive or to continue at least like paying the bills in general. But we have seen that the local governments has an important role. So it's like the policies that they are putting in place, or like the ones that they are adapting, at least like to manage, like to keep the activities, I think will be fundamental. And actually it was quite important because in the last webinar that we had like with many colleagues and partners, it's like the importance of the management. No, I talk about that a little bit in my presentation, but for example, like the local governments who has a management system of public space also were easier like to cope with a crisis, and now it's also facilitating the process like to economic recovery. And this is quite fundamental. If a city has a sort of management system of public space, I think is fundamental like for the recovery post pandemic. Yes, over. Thanks.
Okay, so you, I was thinking maybe one thing could be interesting. I was before for preparing of this last session, I was writing down kind of 6 points, which I thought like going through this whole process. Actually, it's no rocket science, and nothing kind of maybe so special. But which I find for myself to summarize some of the things that I've heard from many of these inputs. And what I would do, maybe if you don't mind, I would maybe show them to you, because I think it would be nice. We have this kind of 100 speakers and all those inputs and so many things we can learn from all of you. If we could find basically certain kind of points that we think are points that we should take on from there, right? Because also we will do other publication summaries and so on. But also to hear your comments. Maybe there are things that are not there that should be there, and so on. So maybe I just share this with you and see just to provoke maybe a reaction, or maybe it's so bland that anyway everyone will say that, well, because it's more in the details and how to often to achieve this, right? Because it's easy to say, right? Because to do is much more difficult, right? So the points that I summarized, and or maybe one can formulate it a little bit different, but would be something like this here. So how to save public space culture in the new normal. So first of all, I think that also in the morning we had, for example, also today, amazing presentation, and what we hear again and again in terms of environment and many other aspects, that many people say, okay, no return to the old normal, right? That we have really a kind of made this kind of amazing experience, but also the normal brought us where we are, right? So maybe it cannot be the solution, right? Because it brought us also the crisis. But then in terms of the points to look at, responsible and efficient actions of governments and civic society. We've seen, we had so many inputs from New Zealand, from Taiwan, from Hong Kong to a certain degree, from other places that have learned either through SARS or through good policy making, that really were able from the government side to really implement very quickly ideas how to cope. And on the other hand, but also the civic society response, right? I believe we cannot just say, oh, the government doesn't do the job and there's no responsibility for us, because I think, for example, in Hong Kong, why we have so little numbers is because people behave, they learn from SARS, right? They all know, even before the first regulations were there, people would act responsibly. No, or in Taiwan, even though people were basically creating a system to get quickly masks, and everyone wanted to have masks because they don't want to kill other people and themselves, right? So I think that's, of course, the responsibility that we all have, and also on the other hand, governments. Then the next point, we also saw again and again that where social spatial inequality was, like poor migrants in horrible conditions, or people living in subdivided flats in New York areas where people are not health insured, and often, because it's not density, but it's basically crowded apartments and so on, where people live with 10 people there and cannot social distance, right? This is very, very dangerous, right? And it often comes back to, there are many social spatial inequalities. It's also, do I have a pharmacy nearby or medical service? But it's also particularly housing, right? Is such an important point. Then provide adequate public space. Of course, we are all talking about this, and together with services that can be reached through them, and particularly also on neighborhood level, right? We cannot, if we are for example, in New Zealand, people could just walk within 5 kilometers in the neighborhood, and nobody wants to take a car or a public transport in a pandemic to go to a public space, right? It cannot work, right? But on the other hand, also in terms of the bigger scale, those kind of bigger infrastructures that fostering better environmental and human well-being, that might be biking connections and all those kind of green connectors, all those kind of things that work maybe on a larger scale, but also have a lot of environmental benefits, no? Because we also heard about the environmental side. Jim, I totally agree with you. Although I would still fight for a nice bookstore in the area and a restaurant, even though, and I wouldn't see that as a capitalist thing necessarily. And then we also had those sessions on online and face-to-face support networks, right? We all saw how important online works. This whole endeavor would never happen without Zoom, right? And so it's great, but it only can also create so much. There are also gaps what we cannot achieve. And then a very important point, initiatives to rebuild community trust, right? Because we've seen in some places that are still counting maybe votes, or there are places where maybe also through social media and so on, trust in communities and governments have eroded, and we have to rebuild them. And I thought one thing that was a very beautiful thing in this kind of series that Luisa brought in also very much were those sessions on the innovative artist approaches. And I think not to forget in this kind of time of crisis that investments, not like some places, I think, for example, Netherlands is still kind of investing into art also now, right? And why that's important, maybe it makes, I mean, art is maybe one of the ways, there are many ways, right? But we felt often that those contributions that we saw, they were uplifting. We were kind of smiling, but at the same time we were seeing a problem, right? It makes it maybe easier to talk about our differences, about our problems, and of course in a moment of crisis where everyone is already kind of very frustrated, right? So maybe something that is also in a creative way addressing this kind of lack of community trust or and so on could be maybe interesting. Now these are my personal, or maybe also not personal, but basically reflecting on what I heard from others. And just wanted to put that out. Maybe we can still have 5 minutes. I think then we need to move on with our walking trip. Is there any response how we can improve this, how to make this better? Of course, more detailed and so on, because we will create a report for Jose, for you and Habitat, right? So to have a direction, or also if there are comments from the audience. Maurice.
Yes, a very clear overview, Hendrik. I do agree, and I would like to stretch a little bit the third point: provide adequate public space and services on the neighborhood level, and then I draw back on questions which are earlier raised in this session and in previous webinars, as well as terms raised. And I want to recall one of the 3 points Jose was putting forward, is that we not only should rethink the state of the cities and reducing the risk of values of current models, but that we foremost also should rethink the urban morphology. And in our observation, this means that we should design perhaps not only more public space, but foremost design more public spaces of better quality, hence design quality public spaces. But this doesn't go alone in conditions where people don't stay close to their homes. So in addition to the shift of change in designing public spaces, I would also like to emphasize the importance of hybridity in the neighborhoods, and thus the mixed use in all neighborhoods. And then I'm referring to, say, Iquique in Chile, the favelas of Fortaleza, Fort Heights in Chicago, Capocha in Moscow, or any place in the Netherlands or all over the world. We have to rethink not only the inner cities, but every part of the city. And we have changed the layout and redesigned the city. So that would be my addition to this.
Okay, you can send us this, maybe would be great. Any other comments? Jose?
Yes, no, thanks a lot, Hendrik, and also share my vision with Maurice. I think like the issue of design and also management, something that I will add on urban morphology. But for instance, only like to complement a little bit, we have seen in our researches that actually the amount of public space in cities are reducing. Like this is something a fact, and also the amount of the streets in the cities, and also the connectivity of the streets. So there are many factors that is like basically in our urban development model on terms of morphology were not sort of conducive like to a better connectivity and accessibility and enjoyment of public space. No, so I think that there are certain conditions. Going specifically to my reactions on your 6 points, I think, for instance, in the first one, this is fundamental responses on efficient actions and governance and civil society. I will add also other partners, no? Like for example, the role of academia, that is fundamental, the role of private sector, and that goes like with a governance system in general that you have in place in a city, no? And even like the connection with the national government, and it's like you will have like a different models on the governance, but I think this is fundamental to reinforce this point. On the point 3, that is related more with compact city and to provide adequate public space and services. I also with that the service and jobs. I think this is going to be fundamental. Even the house as a job place, no? So it's like we have to rethink the house in general as a place where you will stay more, no? So it's like the housing condition, as you were saying, I think is something that is quite important. And then something that I only wanted to add on our experience in the 6.6 on initiative to rebuild community trust. One of the first interventions that happened in Kibera in Kenya was like the intervention of youth organization, like painting walls or murals, like to give the right communication messages of how to behave against COVID-19 pandemic. No, so this is quite fundamental. So it has an important role, like an art initiative, and also the community itself, like an informed community, is quite fundamental, because there is a lot of media and there is a lot of ideas going around that not necessarily give you the right information. No, I think this is quite fundamental. And the last point that maybe is a little bit outside and is more about urban development in general, there is going to be a rethink between the connection between urban and rural. We have seen in the pandemic that a lot of the people have now moved into the rural areas. So maybe like this kind of urban and rural linkages will be very important, like to think about the value or the why cities are still very important, taking in consideration pandemics, and also like for innovations and all the things that we like for cities. No, but I think like this is there will be a push for certain population to go back to rural land, or to avoid urban development, densities, innovation, etc. No, so I think I will leave it like that. Thanks.
Thank you. I pick all your intelligence, right? And I thought already like 6 points is not a good number, so we can extend this. Jim, your final thing, then we have a nice wrap up, because I think we need to finish also.
Yeah, thanks. I did put something in the chat because I knew we were pinched on time, but my take here on this is that slow, safe, and green, it's a great formula, and it really is inside all of those things that you say here for the future planning of the cities that we want. And the good news is that it is affordable. That stuff is affordable, and it can be delivered quickly. We've seen that because of COVID. People have transformed things, reimagined public space very quickly, and delivered it very, very fast. And not only that, it's been popular. 54%, I think, is our current tally of the things that people say they're going to, is the amount of interventions that are planned to be made permanent post-COVID. And that, I think, is not enough, but it's an encouraging sign that these things are popular, and we will be better because of it. And so my take is that I don't think communities should be waiting for permission to ask for this, whether it's in Kibera, in the slums of Nairobi, or anywhere else. I think this is the space that we want, and I think it's perfectly possible to say that and get on with it, and have the permission to actually deliver it. And I don't think politicians or other decision makers, we should give them too much responsibility to imagine that unless we ask for it, that they won't decide that that's the right thing to do. And my final point, picking up on all the great things I've heard from all the speakers, I've really enjoyed this panel. So thank you so much again for being part of it, for including me in it. But the thing that I'm often, it all comes down to when talking to communities and cities around the world is, what are we measuring? How do we define this success? When we talk about culture or normal, or the cities that we want, very often when we talk about networks, we're talking about mode share, how many people are walking, or, we just talked now about the amount of public space that's in, that is being reduced. And what we keep hearing time and time again is about quality. And I just wonder whether actually what we should be thinking about in the future, and there's a question to Louisa maybe as much as anything, is this our chance, if we're really serious about people, if we're really serious about humanity, is it now the time that we start mapping the emotion of our cities and the responses, the emotional responses of how happy we are? Maybe that's a better measure that unites all of these things, and would give a clearer understanding of whether we've got things right or not. Thanks.
Thank you for asking, Jim. Sorry, just a quick answer, since it's pointing to something that I really care about, happiness. Actually, in 2012, during a period as a visiting scholar at UC Berkeley in the US, I started a survey, which is still available online. I can send you the link. And I can share the link with all the attendees here of this webinar. So the survey is on urban daily life and the pursuit of happiness. So the idea is that urban conditions where you live can have an impact on your happiness, on your well-being, in your daily routines, in your daily life. So I would be happy if you could fill it out and give your response. Thanks for asking.
Okay, I think that we are at the end of this entire endeavor, right? Actually, in 4 minutes, our walking tour starts. In light of that, should we just say, I know we all prepared like some additional words for the end. Luisa, can you say in one sentence what happens with the special issue, and then and maybe a final statement, and then we are wrapping up. Yeah.
Yes, I can just mention that the issue is currently in production, and the issue of the Journal of Public Space related to this initiative, so 2020, a year without public space. So we hope to publish the issue by the end of November or beginning of December, but certainly by the end of the year. You know, the Journal of Public Space produces open access contents, so everything is can be read and downloaded for free. And we are also planning some additional activities, a booklet, a book with an international publisher, so many other possibilities to be engaged. And as I previously announced, also potentially a specific series of webinars addressing this topic maybe next year. We will see if it will be again a year without public space or not. We hope not, because as Jim was mentioning, we are now dreaming the space we want. And so we are playing with our imagination to understand how our cities can give us a new normal, but most of all, a new happiness and enjoyment of being together while being apart. I think this is enough from my side.
And I just want to finish. Thanks to all our speakers today. Jim, you were the first time with us, and amazing to have you with us. And I think maybe going forward, I think your contribution would be also fantastic. Maurice and Jose, for sure, fantastic. Jose really went through all the webinars. You have really and contributed, and of course also by looking at the special issue and so on. And we are thinking also, can we transform some of this kind of education, this forum of conversations and learning as something that could become like a public space academy, or something that could also be of use of for people, that is because it's free, accessible, and so on. And maybe there are chances with Jose to discuss about that later. The other thing I wanted to say for all those people that still have the stamina and so on to stay with us here as an attendee. We have made so many friends in this endeavor. Many people that contacted us from places like Zimbabwe, Rwanda, and so on, that became part of this series. And also the people that I see now here in the under the panelists, under the attendee. So we really think this should be a collective endeavor to build something up together, to really use this chance to come to a not the old normal again, but really create something better along these lines that we are writing there. We will further explore those, but also maybe better than that, right? Okay, so thanks so much. We will, maybe Stephanie, just you want to just mention where the videos will be found, or you just kind of, and the last thing that the tour will start soon?
Right. So like in 2 minutes, right after we wrap up this session, there's a virtual Hong Kong public space tour. In case you're interested in actually seeing some spaces, I'll just post the join in Zoom details right in the chat because we don't have time for signing up and not. In addition to all the wonderful things that Hendrik and Luisa mentioned that we'll be doing afterwards, all the recordings of the panel sessions of this symposium will be uploaded to the YouTube channel of City Space Architecture. I'll also quickly paste the link in the chat so that you can check out the playlist that we already have for previous 20 webinars, but we'll be adding to that. So that's all from my side. Stay tuned to our social media channels. And we'll be having more stuff coming in the future.
And I also want to say, I mean, one thing is I have to say that CHK and also the Worldwide University Networks supported us financially in this endeavor. So I'm very thankful for that. But also I want to definitely mention Ingfan Chan, Clement Chan, and also very much Stephanie, because they were very instrumental, always basically the team I could rely on, or we all, and many of you have gotten emails from them or videos that were edited, and this whole machinery worked very smoothly with their help and couldn't have been otherwise. So thanks so much for that. Okay, so thanks to everyone, and maybe whoever wants to join that walking tour may join us there again. Okay, and that's it for the moment, right? Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. See you soon.
Bye, Maurice.